Okay, good morning everyone online. Welcome to the Climate Ready Round 6 grant webinar. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Dan Hosfeld. I'm a California Sea Grant Fellow working with the Climate Ready program. And on the line here we also have Mary Small, the Conservancy's Chief Deputy Executive Officer. She will be able to answer questions towards the end of the webinar. We've blocked out an hour here, but we're not expecting to take that long. We only have maybe 15 slides to bring you through that are some more details about this round of grants. And we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions at the end, so we don't anticipate taking up that full hour of your time. You can send in your questions through the questions chat box here on your here on the dashboard of GoToWebinar, and you can send those in at any time, but we will get to those questions at the end of the slides here. We are also going to be recording this webinar today, so we'll also post that on our YouTube afterwards. You can refer to that afterwards. We'll also be posting our slides from today. So first, we'll provide some background on the Coastal Conservancy. The Conservancy is a non-regulatory state agency that was established in the 1970s as one of California's 3 coastal zone management agencies. We work with partners to do projects that protect, restore, and provide access to the California coast and San Francisco Bay through partnerships and grant funding. The Conservancy's jurisdiction is shown in green here on this slide. It covers about 30% of California's land area and contains about 75% of the population. The Conservancy was created with a broad mandate and the specific jurisdiction, which enables the Conservancy to develop and implement multi-benefit projects that are tailored to regional needs and that are able to achieve statewide goals. So the Climate Ready program within the Coastal Conservancy seeks to encourage local governments, NGOs, and tribes to take steps to prepare for a changing climate. The goals also include guiding natural resources and human communities to adapt to the impacts of ongoing climate change. In the past, the Climate Ready program has already awarded over $10 million for over 50 projects. Those projects have ranged in scope. They focus on mostly multi-benefit projects that use natural systems to assist communities in adapting to impacts from climate change. This includes a variety of things: sea level rise adaptation, living shorelines, carbon sequestration, rangeland and agricultural projects, as well as urban greening projects. But this year in this round, there are more specific requirements compared to last year's. So for round 6, we're prioritizing projects that are focused on nature-based climate adaptation, with the priorities being managed retreat projects. So the goal is to encourage planning or implementation of managed retreat projects with this round. The Conservancy is interested in supporting managed retreat of public facilities and infrastructure, especially where relocation or retreat of those things allows for restoration of natural habitat. We're also considering applications for planning and implementation of living shorelines projects, as they often provide many of the same benefits as the managed retreat projects we're looking for this round. So, like last round, this round of Climate Ready grants is funded by the California Cap and Trade auction proceeds. The programs and projects that are funded by these proceeds are collectively called California's Climate Investments, which is that logo that you'll see floating around. So some of the proceeds from the Cap and Trade auction are deposited into the state's Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF as I'll call it, which directs those dollars towards projects that then reduce greenhouse gas emissions throughout the state. And in order to be eligible for these funds, projects must facilitate in some way the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So in the case for our grants, if you're applying for planning funds, there probably won't be direct greenhouse gas reduction during that planning, but your application should explain that when the project you're planning is implemented, it will include some form of greenhouse gas reduction that could be in the form of carbon sequestration through habitat restoration or tree planting or again, any other kind of greenhouse gas reduction that would result from the implementation of that project. We anticipate that most of the projects that will be funded this round will achieve this through carbon sequestration, but it is not necessarily limited to that. So these California climate investments are managed by the California Air Resources Board, which we'll call ARB from now on. And ARB guidelines require at least 35% of funded projects to be located in a priority community. So we'll define those for you here. So defining priority populations, we're using the Air Resources Board's definitions that are defined by the legislation that guides them. So the image here on this slide shows a link that you can follow, and there's also that same link in the announcement, which leads you to this EnviroScreen page. The definition of a disadvantaged community is one that is in the top 25% of Cal EnviroScreen 3.0 scores. And a low-income community is a census tract that's either at or below 80% of statewide median income, or designated as low income by the Housing and Community Development state income limits. So we don't have to get too into the weeds about the policy that guides this designation, but if you are considering applying for a project that's located within one of these communities, really all you'll have to do is follow this link and go to this map and look and make sure that your location of your project falls within one of these two designations. As you can see on the map, there's a couple different colors. Pink is for the disadvantaged communities, blue is for low-income communities, and then there's the combinations of the two. And on the webpage, you'll see that ARB has different percentages for the different community types, but we are not, we're treating all of these different types equally, so we won't score higher for a disadvantaged community over a low-income community, for instance. So if you're applying for a project within a DAC, in order to qualify, it must physically be located in that community, and it must meet a demonstrated need of that community. So if you're applying for a Climate Ready grant, that project is very likely already meeting that a common need, but it would also be beneficial to show that there's been some community engagement or community support for the potential project. It must also provide direct and meaningful benefits to that community, and so this checklist is an example. This is what we have in our application, and it also includes most of what the Air Resource Board considers to be direct and meaningful benefits. And we can walk you through those if there's specific questions too. So as a recap, given the program goals and the funding guidelines that we've been sharing, a great fit for this round will be a planning or implementation for a managed retreat project. It will increase resilience to sea level rise. We're also looking for projects that promote collaboration among various stakeholders in multiple sectors to advance climate adaptation. We're also looking for demonstration projects potentially that implement innovative adaptation approaches, especially when they're useful pilot projects. We're definitely looking for projects that have some aspect of greenhouse gas emission reductions or enhances the ability of natural systems to sequester these greenhouse gases. And finally, as we mentioned, providing those multiple benefits we're looking for, as well as benefits directly to priority populations. So now we'll get into the logistics a bit of the application itself. The application is due July 1st. We recommend sending in pre-proposal consultations with our regional managers. We're going to post the contact information for them, and it's also found within our grant announcement. Basically, for these consultations, we recommend just writing a short paragraph that describes your potential project, and you send that along to the manager and get in touch with them. So all of our application materials are available on the Climate Ready website. These materials all need to be sent in together. And for the nonprofit organization pre-award questionnaire, if you've submitted one within the last 2 years, you won't be required to send in another, but we would ask that you just tell us on what date you submitted your last one. And we will also be posting basic information about all the applications that we received on the Conservancy website, so that's just a heads up for that. So once we receive the applications, we'll first screen them, whether it's important to note whether it meets the purposes of our Climate Ready grant round. It will also need to demonstrate the facilitation of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll also be looking to see whether it advances sea level rise adaptation specifically. So this is our scoring criteria. It's slightly different from last year's. We're incorporating a few different things because our requirements are a little more specific this year, but I'll go through them briefly. First, as I mentioned, will this achieve the purposes of this round of Climate Ready grants? We're looking for those multiple benefits and maximizing benefits. Does the project incorporate the best available science and practices? We're looking for the demonstration of meaningful community engagement and support. We'd like to see a clear plan for monitoring for these projects, especially for pilot projects. And we're also looking to see whether the applicant has demonstrated past success with implementing similar projects of similar scope. And then along those lines, we're looking to see that the scope itself is reasonable. And finally, whether or not we will assign points whether or not the project is located within one of the disadvantaged communities. Here's a brief slide just showing the basic timeline of this application process. So as I mentioned, applications are due July 1st. At the end of September or around that time in the fall, applicants will be notified about our decisions. And then the projects will likely be brought to a meeting for the Conservancy Board to approve in December of 2019. Projects can expect to begin as early as January 2020, but no earlier than that. And funds will need to be spent by March 1st, 2023. Another quick note, these projects are going to be reported on back to the Air Resources Board. And this is a new process for us, so we will be working with all the grantees who are awarded projects on their project reporting. We can talk specifically about that if there are questions, but when the time comes up, it appears to be that we will work directly with you, either the project managers or myself, the Sea Grant Fellow, will work with the grantees to achieve all the reporting requirements for ARB. So before we get into specific questions from our attendees, we'll go through a few of our frequently asked questions about these grant rounds. So first, we don't have a minimum or maximum amount that you need to apply for, but we anticipate funding 3 to 5 projects, and there's $2.8 million available total. We will consider planning projects provided that they will lead to a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and that they show they're an essential step to develop a specific project, and that they have a clear plan for future implementation. Broad vulnerability assessments might not be competitive this round, but planning for a specific project will be. And we're also focusing on coastal managed retreat for this round of grants instead of inland. And we can also discuss the possibility of applying for land acquisition. A few more frequently asked questions. You can use this funding for community engagement. We cannot reimburse for work that was done prior to the award date. And we do not require matching funds, but there is some benefit to having matching funds in our scoring criteria. Finally, as I mentioned, we will be posting these slides. We'll also be posting this recording for everyone to look back on. So with that, we will transfer over to questions. We welcome you to add those now. Looks like we have a couple questions coming in. Let's see. First, from Lisa, would a wetlands mitigation project at a public university about 5 miles from the coast be eligible?
So this is Mary Small at the Coastal Conservancy. There's sort of two things about that I would have questions about. One is the word mitigation. If it's a required mitigation for some other impact, then it wouldn't be eligible for these grant funds. And then, as Dan just said, we're really interested, and the purpose of the appropriation was to help with climate adaptation. So I think we would need to understand how the project actually was advancing adaptation to future climate change. You know, our focus has been for this round is really on sea level rise adaptation. So I guess I'm saying it's probably not going to be a high priority. The second question is how much of the $2.1 million is restricted to priority area projects. It's actually $2.8 million, still not a ton of money, and it's 35% at least 35% needs to be spent within disadvantaged communities and benefiting disadvantaged communities.
Here we go. Okay.
Okay, that's all right. I know you mentioned community engagement activities are allowed. Just to clarify, is planning at a very early phase allowed? Yeah, I think that early phase planning could be eligible. The trick is that you would have to demonstrate both that you're going to get to a project, that you have some plan for how you're going to implement that project, and that when you implement that project, you will be both reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to climate change. So you'll have to draw those lines together for us. I mean, I think we understand that planning is a long process, and we want to make these funds available to support planning, but it needs to kind of tie together that there is a strategy, at least, for implementation, if that makes sense. Can you give a few examples of a way a plan can facilitate GHG emissions? We don't think that the plans themselves will facilitate GHG reduction. I think that what you're going to need to do, and ARB I think is on board with this, is what you need to do is explain how the project, when the project is implemented that you're planning for, how that would eventually lead to GHG reductions. And again, we expect, given kind of the focus of this, that most of them will be through habitat restoration and carbon sequestration. But you could also, if you're incorporating a trail or something that's going to be used as an alternative for transportation, and you can make a case for reducing straight up emissions, that works as well. Can a feasibility study begin before the grant is awarded and be viewed as matching funds for the purpose of being more competitive? We wouldn't count work done before our award as matching funds, but actually in that support category, I think if the feasibility study had community involvement and showed that there was support for the project, you would still end up getting points in that same score. So yes and no. Again, matching funds, since the matching funds aren't actually required, I think it would still demonstrate that there was support. Okay, our organization focuses on implementation of community-powered models for carbon sequestration. Will future rounds support inland work? Yes, they probably will. Because we don't have very much money this round, we're really trying to focus on coastal sea level rise adaptation to kind of narrow it down. We would love to be supporting broader climate adaptation if we have more resources. Can you elaborate on whether acquisitions would be eligible? I think acquisition projects would be eligible, that they would just need to kind of tick all of the boxes of the program. So if that land acquisition is part of a strategy for shoreline adaptation or climate adaptation and sea level rise adaptation, then you could make that case. I could envision a situation where that would be an appropriate piece of that puzzle. I think you would also need to talk about the future management of the property so that you can get the GHG credits for continuing to have carbon sequestration on the property. Subcoastal shorelines considered, like along the Napa River. We're really trying to focus on sea level rise adaptation. I confess I'm not quite sure how far the tidal range goes up the Napa River. I think it'd be a stretch. Because we don't have too much money for this round, we really focused on sea level rise adaptation, and we're thinking it will mostly be on the open coast. Sorry.
And that said, that question, Liz, if you have more specific questions on that range and want to discuss the tidal range, you can feel free to email me and we can talk about it more. So
did we miss
looks
any?
like no, we haven't missed any questions. So if we have any other questions, please toss them into the questions pane now. Otherwise, we'll give it another minute here. There we go. Here's one. When you say open coast, does this exclude San Francisco Bay? No, we are including San Francisco Bay in this round of grants. We got that one already. Are there any other questions that we can answer here? Again, as I mentioned, we will post these questions as well, and along with the recording and some slides. So you can always refer back to these. Okay, it looks like we might not have any more questions coming in. So thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned, we'll make sure all these resources are available, and feel free to reach out to me, Dan Hosfeld, and as well, here, I can pull up quickly our final slide. Thanks for joining us. There's my email at the top, and then here also are the emails for all of the regional managers who you can contact depending on the location of your project. Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. We hope to hear from you soon. Have a great rest of your day.